After 21 seasons as the world's greatest hockey player and his sport's greatest ambassador, Wayne Gretzky called it quits. He was certain of his decision. You could see it in his eyes. Even though an hour earlier, as he took a final lap around the Madison Square Garden ice, they'd been brimming with tears. You could hear it in his voice as he described the phone calls he'd received from Michael Jordan and Mario Lemieux telling him how much he'd enjoy his retirement. You could read it on his face as he described the final timeout that New York Rangers coach John Muckler called with 30 seconds left in a 1-1 game, while the sellout crowd chanted his name. Muckler called Gretzky over and told him he had to score the game winner. But it wasn't meant to be. When he was younger, Gretzky probably would have scored the big goal. But in his last game, it was Jaromir Jagr who scored the game winner in overtime, temporarily putting a damper on Gretzky's big night. But the disappointment of defeat didn't last long. Gretzky hugged Jagr and said it was fitting that the best young player in the game had scored the winning goal, a sort of passing of the torch. Then Gretzky went to center ice, and before an assemblage of former foes, teammates and friends, soaked in a 15-minute ovation given by the 18,000 fans who'd come to see hockey's greatest player leave the ice for the final time. It was a decision he'd been wrestling with since around Christmas, which is when he first brought the subject up with his wife Janet. Gretzky again led the Rangers in scoring with 9 goals and 53 assists in 70 games, but his numbers were way down from his usual output, and he had the worst plus-minus rating on the team. Even after winning his third All-Star Game MVP, Gretzky thought about retirement more and more. While sitting out 12 games with an injured disc in his neck, he made up his mind. During his absence, the Rangers went 6-3-3 and played some of their best hockey of the season. Gretzky was still capable of thrilling even the most jaded observer with his uncanny passing, but he'd lost too much of his foot speed. At 38, Gretzky was seeing loose pucks go to younger legs, and his fierce pride told him it was better to leave the game a year early than a year late. Once he decided to retire, he didn't announce anything, not wanting to distract the team in its attempt to make the playoffs. Gretzky told only Janet and his mother Phyllis. He couldn't bring himself to confide in his father Walter, who taught him the game on their backyard rink, until a couple of days before his official announcement. It's difficult to overstate Gretzky's impact on the game. He's both hockey's greatest scorer and its greatest ambassador, the man who almost single-handedly made the NHL viable in California. With his headline-grabbing trade from the Stanley Cup champion Edmonton Oilers to the Los Angeles Kings in 1988, he left the game with a mind-numbing 61 NHL records, many of which will never be broken. From 1981 to 1987, Gretzky averaged 203 points per season. No other NHL player has ever scored 200 points. His record of 92 goals in an 80-game season, which he accomplished in 81-82, is unreachable. Even though he scored 894 goals, the most in NHL history, Gretzky's best remembered for his passing. His vision and imagination were such that he routinely created plays no one had ever seen. Teammates learned to get open and be ready because Gretzky would find a way to get the puck on their sticks. If Gretzky had never scored a goal, he'd still be the NHL's all-time leading scorer on the strength of his 1,963 assists, a staggering 714 more assists than Ron Francis, his closest pursuer. Other records that likely won't be touched are his 50 goals in 39 games, his 163 assists in 85-86, and his scoring streak of at least 1 point in 51 consecutive games in 83-84. To this day, Gretzky remains hockey's most transcendent star. Even though the NHL boasts more young, highly skilled players than ever, it's difficult to imagine one of them hosting Saturday Night Live, which Gretzky did in 1989. Wayne learned a lot from his father Walter, a former Bell Canada telephone employee whose lessons guided Wayne throughout his career. It was almost as if Walter knew exactly what would become of his son, and was preparing him for the role. One life-defining lesson came when Wayne was 10. The year he scored 378 goals in 68 games for a youth team in his hometown of Brantford. It was April, and the season was over, but Brantford had scheduled an exhibition game against a small-town team outside Toronto as a fundraiser. Wayne was already famous in Hockey Mad Canada. He was nicknamed the Great One when he was 9, and as usual, the arena was packed with fans curious to see the young prodigy. But Wayne's mind was elsewhere. Gretzky loved baseball as much as hockey, and dreamed of pitching for the Detroit Tigers. He'd wanted to play baseball the day of the exhibition game, and wasn't at his best, with his team losing the game 8-1. After the game, his father told him he never wanted to see him play like that again. All those people came to see Wayne play, and Walter told his son he had to be at his top level every game, whether it was a September exhibition or Game 7 of the playoffs. Wayne always remembered that lesson, and knew that every time he stepped on the ice, he was on display. The responsibility that went with Wayne's talent was another thing Walter drilled home. Like his boyhood idol Gordie Howe, Gretzky was uncommonly willing to sign autographs, unusually accommodating with the media and unfailingly polite. He was the highest profile player in the league his entire career, and rarely made a mistake. The worst thing he did was refer to the Devils as a Mickey Mouse organization. Gretzky was the kind of guy who'd get to know the equipment staff. He treated everyone with respect. People talk about the burden of potential, but for Gretzky it was never a burden. He loved the challenge of having to live up to high expectations. Even as a teenager, he had no problem with being compared with the great players of the past. When he heard someone say he was too small, too young, or too slow, he relished proving his detractor wrong. The thinking in 1979, Gretzky's rookie season in the NHL, was that the 18-year-old hotshot from the World Hockey Association was too small, slow, and weak to succeed. It was a much more violent league then. The Philadelphia Flyers, known as the Broad Street Bullies, were the NHL's top draw. Some observers thought a few tough hits would slow Gretzky down, except no one could touch him. Quick, unpredictable, and elusive, Gretzky ushered in a new style of play that spelled the doom of the big, tough, and mobile defenseman. Gretzky and the Oilers changed the way the game's played. Their all-out attack was something the league hadn't seen before. They had a lot of great players, but Gretzky was the centerpiece. He used quick counterattacks, which is how he got so many breakaways. The Oilers used him as a penalty killer when very few offensive stars were used in that role. Now nearly every team does it. Gretzky would set up behind the net, from which point he'd feed breaking wingers or dart out in front for a wraparound. His second innovation was to break over the blue line and spin toward the boards, eventually passing to a teammate who broke late into the zone. He was the first one to make the late man coming into the zone the most dangerous man on the ice. Gretzky could hold onto the puck for so long, turning toward the boards and stick handling in place, that even if he knew what he was going to do, you couldn't stop him. Even to someone sitting high in the stands, where the patterns of play are clear, Gretzky's passes were surprising, bringing a collective gasp of delight as he found the open man. Initially, he took time away from hockey to enjoy being a parent to his 3 kids. He later returned to the game, first as the executive director of the 2002 Canadian Olympic team, and then as the head coach of the Phoenix Coyotes. Gretzky's now a member of TNT's NHL panel, and arguably remains hockey's most well-known figure and greatest ambassador. The Great One's career is one for which there'll be no following acts. Number 99 was one of a kind. That's all for this look back at Wayne Gretzky. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.